edge-up methodology in knife fighting is something that you see in a lot of knife fighting methodologies. You see some of it in the Balisong methodology and even in the Bowie methodology, but it is a little more explicit in the Navaja methodology. For today's episode, we're going to go over what the edge-up methodology is for the Spanish Navaja, and I'm going to do a lot of that illustration with the cold steel Espada XL in the G10 handle. However, a lot of that application, in my opinion, works really well and is highly optimized for the very underrated but very affordable cold steel Luzon XL. This is a really fantastic knife, which from what I understand was modeled after one of Lynn Thompson's favorite Balisong. So in many ways, what we're going to see today is another episode that draws some correlation between the Spanish Navaja methodology and the Filipino martial arts use of the Batangas Balisong. In James Loriega's teachings, the majority of the edge orientation of the Spanish Navaja happens to be edge down. Much of the Navaja methodology relies upon the cloak and dagger setup. And I take the Navaja, put it behind the blanket, and you never really know what the orientation of the knife is going to be, or also what angle it's going to even come from. So what makes this methodology very compelling as a study is that it helps you understand, number one, efficient biomechanics as it relates to the fluid dynamics between lead shoulder or rear shoulder and vice versa, but also number two, how we use biomechanics as a form of deception, whether I'm going to come in this way or I'm going to come in over, and as we want to cover in today's episode, we come in this way, or as Maestro James Loriega likes to call it, the Mediterranean grip. And the reason why he calls it the Mediterranean grip, because in his knife research and studies, he found that this was actually a very prevalent blade orientation for knife fighters who come from the Mediterranean region. So he called this grip the Mediterranean grip. This edge-up orientation can also be found in the Filipino Balisong methodology. We know that the standard and basic opening for a Filipino Balisong, this is the Benchmade 85, we hold it in what's called the safe grip, is where the latch secures itself. So we know it's the safe grip because when we open the blade and it happens to open, the handle is going to hit us on this side. That way I can twist it so that when the blade hits me, it won't be the edge that's going to cut me. So I can do this very safely, twist it over, and then close. So that's the basic opening. The not so safe opening, of course, is if I hold it in the latch opening this way, because as you can see, if I were to do that, that edge is going to go straight for my fingers, and that's not a very good thing. So the idea is that with a Balisong, we use the safe handle, basic opening, and voila, I'm completely safe, and the knife is now ready to go. But it is ready to go in an edge down orientation. This was a problem for a lot of Balisongeros, especially when this was very prevalent in the 1950s and 60s in the Philippines. When we do the standard and basic opening, it folds down this way and it is now edge down. The problem with it being edge down is a matter of the first problem, deployment. When it deploys in this manner, it is not a fast enough deployment because of the second problem. In the Philippines, there's a term called kapit talim. Kapit means to grab. Talim means sharp. So basically, grabbing the sharp edge. In a moment of desperation, when the person is not armed, or if they cannot deploy the Balisong fast enough and someone gets the drop on them, the idea is when the Balisongero points their knife at somebody and the person kind of goes, whoa, give me a second. What this person does is that he takes his palm and puts it right on top of the blade. And then the other hand kind of comes up on the wrist, which creates this fulcrum problem and basically ends up disarming the Balisongero. So this kapitali method was a very prevalent method in terms of defending yourself in very desperate circumstances against somebody who pulls a Balisong on somebody in the Philippines back then. So the solution that they came with is what's called the Manila opening. And the Manila opening is when they grab the latch handle. So not the safe handle, it's the latch handle. And the idea is that they simply flip the knife open, edge up, so that if the person who's defending himself wants to do the copy talim method, they're really going to copy the talim and they're going to get cut. This is the Filipino implementation of the Mediterranean grip, but it was born out of this specific circumstance. When I demonstrate this with the Luzon, this is such an underrated design because in many ways it actually lends itself very well to the Manila opening without being a balisong, because first and foremost, this flicks the knife open, and when you press here and flick the knife open, you can actually flip it up into that Mediterranean grip. But this is designed with a liner lock with a switch on this side so that it actually locks the liner lock in place. So where does the intelligence come from? Well, when I first started working with it and I was thinking, all right, it was designed after Lynn Thompson's favorite balisong, so I figured you flick it open, edge down, but you kind of have to finagle your way to the switch, and the first thing that lines up with it is the index finger. It happens, but you lose time. It doesn't feel very natural. However, if we use the mechanics of the Manila folder, flick it up so that it's edge up, my thumb lines up naturally against it, and so now I have this beautiful alignment with the Luzon in that Mediterranean grip, or the Manila opening. So to me, the Luzon XL knife is optimized for that Manila opening without necessarily having a balisong for it. So I'm going to be moving around with the cold steel espada, using a lot of that Navaja methodology. I'm going to be moving primarily with the cold steel Luzon XL and show you how the Manila opening and that Mediterranean grip works really well with this specific knife, so that this in many ways acts as a hybrid Spanish Navaja and Filipino balisong that has been optimized for the Mediterranean Manila grip. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for letting me share.
Setting up the Spanish Navaja using the cloak and dagger methodology requires a very close examination, because this allows us to set up the deceptiveness of the Navaja, what kind of grip I happen to be holding it in. In this instance, I'm holding it in the saber grip, but as you can see, with some fakes and feints, hard to tell when I'm going to throw it or in what orientation. And this time I'm going to be using the plumada revés position using the modified foil grip. Standing at a relatively tall and neutral posture, it is from this position that we can change to the Mediterraneo grip and fire from this kind of angle. So even though I am not firing at full speed, it is very difficult to tell what kind of angle I am going to be coming at. This is what makes the Spanish Navaja cloak and dagger methodology so effective, because even with a relatively slow speed, it is very unpredictable to figure out what kind of angle I'm going to be coming at you with. The Mediterraneo grip is one of my favorites to practice, especially when I am using the Navaja cloak and dagger methodology, because it allows me time to make the manipulations with the Navaja. Take a look at how the index finger lands on the lock. This is a no-no, so it is important using the cold steel Espada XL to adjust the hand down the handle so that you are now safely in a position to use the Mediterraneo grip. For illustrative purposes, I'm going to turn to the side to show you how close the Navaja is to the cloak. Any attacks to the high line with generally conventional attacks like thrust to the face require a use of the cloak to the eyes and then followed up with a thrust. So any high line attacks require that the knife be very close to the cloak or to the poncho. For instance, using this Habeke Andres attack, which is relatively conventional. The relatively unconventional attacks that come from the Mediterraneo grip require a little more setup and a little bit more trickery, which means that the knife actually has to be held a little further back. So it has to be held further back, just like what you saw on the cover of the Manual de Baratero, because this allows me to change my grip, use it so that here in this edge down position, you see how close it is to the cloak, but when I put it behind my hip, it is now in the Mediterraneo grip. This allows me to attack the low line. So I need to take that knife away from the cloak to attack the low line using the Mediterraneo Grip. This is the general objective with the cloak, because what it does is it hides the intentions of the Navaja. Having the Navaja close to the cloak allows me to attack the high line, but having the Navaja close to my hip allows me to set up the Mediterraneo Grip and then fire any attack I want, which makes it very unpredictable for the Navaja because you never really know from this position what kind of attack will come. Let's get things out of the way. With the Cold Steel Luzon XL, if I use the edge down opening, it's very hard for me to close that assisted lock with my index finger. However, if I use the edge up orientation opening, the Manila opening, then I can go ahead and use my thumb to actually secure that lock firmly as we start to go into the positions and postures that are within the Spanish Navaja curriculum. Notice that I am far more exposed and less deceptive simply because we are starting to hybridize the Batangas blade curriculum with the Spanish Navaja curriculum, and Filipinos did not carry capes or cloaks. But notice that some of these movements actually expose me to a lot of attacks. You know this intuitively just by watching these movements here. Without that cloak, a lot of the Spanish Navaja methodology does not work with a lot of these attacks that I am showing here. There is a specific reliance on lead switching in the Spanish Navaja methodology when it comes to creating a deceptive setup for the Mediterraneo Grip. Without the cape, with the Filipino Balisong methodology, we cannot implement this with the Batangas Balisong methodology. We would have to use good posture, good positioning, and good footwork, but most of all, really good hand manipulation so that we can implement that Mediterraneo Grip. So take a look at how I use this Hybridizing San Andres combination, which is the Navaja version of the X pattern. But there's a way to use it so that there's a type of hand opening with the Batangas blade so that it opens a certain way, and the Mediterraneo Grip can actually turn from this position and then now it cuts up. So there's a very unique trick to this without the use of the cloak. It requires switching from the standard hammer grip, which I'm going to display here, where basically I'm going to grip it completely with my hand, but then I extend my fingers so that I'm gripping the knife along my fingers. This allows me a couple of options. One of them is allows me to more easily pass the balisong over to the left hand, and that is a big part of the deceptive tactics that we use in the balisong method. But what it also does is that it creates a kind of ocular tracking so that when I hand it off to the right, just when he thinks I'm going to hand it off to my left hand, I actually switch it over into the Mediterraneo Grip and then cut up. This changes the beat structure so that just when he thinks I'm going to hand it off to my left, on the half beat, I turn that switch and now it is in the edge up orientation and then I cut up. It is such a fast technique, and it is something that is optimized for the Cold Steel Luzon XL because of that flipper guard that happens to be there. But the handle design is such so I don't necessarily have to use the thumb. I just roll my fingers and go into the Mediterraneo. The way I like to practice with the Cold Steel Luzon XL is really more along the Batangas Balisong line, where I tend to hold my arm out and use the Hybridizing San Andres technique so that that's where the hybridization comes in from the Navaja, and I use good footwork to maintain my distance. Every now and then I try to remind myself that look, you can go ahead and use the Mediterraneo Grip, but you can also use to pass it off to the left hand. That way I can really vary my beat structure and also maintain the entire practice of good posture, good positioning with the Navaja Balisong hybrid that meets in the Cold Steel XL Luzon. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around, stay tuned, more videos to come.